On the wall of the temple of Latopolis is the head of an Egyptian king. Above it appeared to be the customary hieroglyphics of a cartouche, a royal inscription. The monarch wears the tall, pointed hat of a pharaoh. His hands are outstretched, adoring some god of the Nile, in the stilted, formal attitude inseparable from Egyptian art. An observer unlearned in the hieroglyphics might well conjecture that here was one of the mighty Ramessidae, or Thothmes, the conqueror of Syria in the days before the Exodus. A reading of the inscription, however, tells us that this is Decius, the Roman emperor whose brief reign was marked by the great persecution of the Christians, and who perished in battle with the Germanic Goths in 251 AD. The relief at Latopolis is then instructive. It reminds the student that the Roman Empire was not a nation but a world, that old conditions and local customs lingered long, and that it is unsafe to generalize from data secured from one part of the vast empire as to things which obtained in and that it is unsafe to generalize from data secured from one part of the vast empire as to things which obtained in the rest of it. Nevertheless, considering its bulk and the population which entered into the huge fabric, how many jarring races, languages, creeds, how violent was the process of assimilation. How Rome bought every acre of her empire with her own blood and that of the conquered. It is marvelous what unity was ultimately attained. Until when the empire was dissolving in wreck, the Britons, almost the last race to bow to the legions, could mourn the departure of those guardian eagles, which had so long stood as the representatives of a law and order men had never seen before. But the process of trampling down weak and decaying nationalities had been mainly done before the corrupt Senate passed its powers over to the abler Caesars. The brutal cut and thrust of conquest had been accomplished by the now vanished republic. Carthage was conquered, Mithridates was conquered, Egypt was ripe to fall, hardly struggling into the hands of the heir of Julius Caesar. Only Parthia, of all the lands within the circle of antiquity, quote unquote, preserved a sullen independence. Attacks might come from without, from the German and Scythian barbarians, but a successful revolt against Rome had become almost impossible. Vercingetorix, the Gaul, was practically the last national champion to confront the Eagles, with the last hope of success until Arminius, the German, should succeed where the chief of the Averni, the king of Pontus, and the general of Carthage had failed. Come good, come ill, the ancient civilized world must endure the fates allotted by its Roman masters, so that world suffered during the weary years of senatorial misrule, and suffered still more during the 3 civil wars of Caesar against Pompeius, of the triumvirs against Brutus and Cassius, and of Octavius against Marcus Antonius. The Battle of Actium, 31 BC, did more than decide that Antonius and Cleopatra were not to transfer the center of empire from Rome to Alexandria. The victory of Octavius was followed by a peace and prosperity that seemed almost miraculous to men from the first outbreak of Mithridates, 88 BC. The victory of Octavius was followed by a peace and prosperity that seemed almost miraculous to men who, from the first outbreak of Mithridates, 88 BC, had forgotten what peace was in the east, while in the west, war had seemed the normal condition for still longer generations. The closing of the temple of Janus was no idle ceremony. It meant that the old days of violence were at an end, that life, property, and manly honor were safe. That 2 centuries were coming in which men could draw breath and enjoy the sunlight before the coming of the shadows. Before the coming of the shadows of the later empire and of the wreck of the Middle Ages. The Romans, as has already been suggested, had been anything but merciful conquerors. Worse than the exactions of rapacious governors. Worse than the exactions of rapacious governors and publicani had been the levies made upon the defeated powers at the end of every war. Many instances might be cited of this wringing of vast sums from the unfortunate. At the end of the First Punic War, Carthage had been obliged to pay Rome 3,200 euboic talents, decidedly over $3,200,000. No, pound. No. Something. Probably dollars. In 10 years, after the Second War, Carthage had to bind herself to pay 200 talents, something under 250,000. 250,000 per year for 50 years, and if a rich city-state like the Queen of North Africa could discharge this burden with an ease alarming to the elder Cato, the fines which the Romans collected from the eastern dynasts must have been direful to those kings' unlucky subjects. 15,000 talents, considerably over $15 million, must Antiochus the Great tell out after his defeat at Magnesia. Mithridates had to pay roundly for the peace he obtained in 84 BC from Sulla, but the chief punishment in this case fell on the luckless Asiatic cities that had joined his cause. Their plight after his great levy of 20,000 talents has been described. It was decades before Asia Minor recovered from the plundering. But after the foreign wars came the civil wars, because Roman fought Roman. Did not make the lot of the provincials happier, especially if their Italian governors had espoused the losing side. Thus Antonius, after the Battle of Philippi, assembled all the representatives of Asia Minor at Pergamus and informed them that though they had already given Brutus and Cassius 10 years tribute in 2 years, now they must pay Antonius and in his army 10 years tribute in 1. The abject groanings of the deputies that this demand would result in their absolute ruin resulted in the demand being reduced to 9 years tribute payable in 2. How unstable property was in such countries at times, how paralyzing to all commercial and industrial enterprise were such calamities, need not be told. It is bad to be subject to rigorous inequitable taxation, but civilized life becomes difficult when property rights become almost a farce. The lot of Italy had hardly been better than the provinces. The civil wars had ruined thousands in a society where the struggle for economic independence was already fierce. The climax seemed reached in the proscription and confiscation conducted by the second triumvirs. 43 BC, the confiscations then were so wholesale that it was almost impossible to find buyers. Some, says Appian, were ashamed to add to the burdens of the unfortunate. Others thought that such property would bring them ill luck, or that as they were not free from dangers with their present holdings, it would be doubly dangerous to increase them. Only the boldest spirits dared to purchase. Thus it befell that the triumvirs, who had hoped to realize enough for all their war preparations, fell short by 20 million drachmas, about $3,200,000, to make good the deficit. 1,400 of the richest women had been ordered to put a large portion of their property at the disposal of the rapacious government, a proceeding which caused such a feminine protest.
Such a feminine protest. Such a feminine protest. The triumvirs ordered their lictors to drive a band of ladies come to protest from their tribunal with the mob, but the mob took up the women's cause. The lictors hesitated and the triumvirs reconsidered.
A proceeding to make good the deficit. 1,400 of the richest women had been ordered to put a large portion of their property at the disposal of the rapacious government, a proceeding which caused such a feminine protest that the number of women liable was reduced from 1,400 to 400, and all men possessing over 400,000 sesterces, about $16,000, were ordered to lend the triumvirs 1/50th of their property and contribute 1 year's income to the cost of the war.
The war, the war, the war,
The war against Brutus and Cassius. Some years later, when Octavius was very popular and was just beginning his war on Antonius to defend the honor of Rome, he ventured again to lay on his countrymen the incredibly heavy war tax of 25% of the income of all real estate owned by freemen and 12.5% of the entire property of ex-slaves. Then after the wars, the contributions, the taxes, and confiscations came peace. And for a time men forgot that great calamities could ever return to vex the world. The greatness of the gift of the Pax Romana by Augustus is hard to realize in an age when war is happily the exception, not the rule. In the second Caesar's own day, men cheerfully recognized the boon. Late in his life, the princeps was chancing to sail by the bay of Puteoli. The passengers and sailors of a ship of Alexandria just then arrived, come to him, clad in white and with chaplets on their heads, loading him with praises and glad acclamations. By you, they cried, we live. By you we sail securely. By you we enjoy our liberty and our fortunes. Our fortunes. The emperor greatly pleased gave each one 40 gold pieces, pledging them all to spend it only on Alexandrian merchandise. No doubt this was a piece of Oriental adulation, but it was adulation almost deserved. It was better, at least for the decade, to earn such praise than to conquer Arminius the German.
And the whole chorus of applause for the empire and its benefits went up during the next generation. At Halicarnassus in Caria, an inscription praises Augustus and his rule as the healing for the whole human race.
The healing for the whole human race, whose providence not merely fulfills the prayers of all but surpasses them. By land and sea we are at peace. The cities flourish in law and order, unity and prosperity, and there is overflow of everything good. About 100 years later, Plutarch is willing to take up the grateful story. He tells us a state ought to supply two things, peace and liberty, and then adds, as to peace there is no need to occupy ourselves, for all war has ceased. As to liberty, we have that which the government of Rome leaves us, and perhaps it would not be good if we should possess any more. A wise saying indicating what is abundantly indicated elsewhere. How intelligent men outside the old senatorial circle at Rome realized that the empire gave all sufficient liberty to the average non-servile individual, seemingly as much personal liberty as is granted in such a semi-free country as present-day Germany. In the times of the Antonines, Aristides, the rhetor is able to follow in the path of Plutarch. The entire continent, he assures us, is in a state of repose, and men no longer believe in war, even when it is raging at some distant point. Finally, about half a century after Aristides, Tertullian, bitter Christian that he is, and opposed to all things pagan, still has his praise for the empire. Every day the world is better known, better tilled, better, more wealthy. The roads are open to commerce, the deserts are changed into fruitful dominion, tillage supplants forest, everywhere are houses, people, cities, everywhere is life. But perhaps the concisest tribute to the imperial system is Appian's, written about the same time as that of Aristides. From the coming of the emperor to the present time, nearly 200 years, the city of Rome has been adorned in a marvelous manner. The revenues of the empire have increased, and in the long-enduring peace, the peoples have advanced to the very height of happiness.
Soon after Tertullian, the clouds began to darken. The empire became more and more an oasis of civilization amid a wilderness of barbarism, with the desert sands ever encroaching. Finally, the sands were to choke out the life-giving waters. But for long, these evil days seemed never to come. The civilized world was under one government, remarkable and intelligent as human institutions go. The extortions of corrupt governors and usurers had notably abated. The barriers of race and prejudice were steadily declining. Hampering customs tariffs appear happily absent. Ancient customs duties were for revenue only. Wars were mainly police expeditions on a distant frontier, glorious to the commanders but not important to civilians. The rumor of battle with the Picts of Caledonia would alarm a Syrian purple merchant almost as little as the tale of a Moro outbreak would a New England cotton weaver. So it was for the 200 and more years from the Battle of Actium to the death of Marcus Aurelius. The abolition of war and the coming of the brotherhood of man were far away, yet the peoples were justified in rejoicing in so much sunlight. How great was the population of this, quote, world of Rome, unquote. Data are lacking. Conjectures differ widely. The ancients seldom appreciated the precise values of figures. And the copyists of the old manuscripts have committed amazing blunders with numerals. So the little information we seem to have is unreliable. No one ever appears to have made a complete census in the modern meaning of the word of the entire empire. Although reliable lists were drawn up
of the persons variously liable to taxation. We know how many Roman citizens there were at several periods, but unfortunately we do not know just who were included in these numbers. E.g., whether persons without taxable property were included, etc. How many dwelt in Italy or outside thereof? Nor is it easy to conjecture how large a percentage of the entire population could boast themselves to be Roman.